Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Ferry with the Aspen Institute's Sports and Society program. Welcome to the latest edition of Future of Sports, our conversation series, which, aligned with the mission of our program, convenes diverse leaders to facilitate conversation and inspire solutions that can help sports serve the public interest. Earlier this month, our Future Sports Conversation series took measure of the disruption in NCAA sports and explored what college reform in the public interest might look like. Now, we turn our attention to the Olympic movement in the U.S. and consider the final report of the Commission on the State of the U.S. Olympics and Paralympics, an independent, bipartisan group set up by Congress that earlier this month delivered 277 pages of findings and recommendations that propose a path forward to reduce abuse in sports, to grow access to sports, and to elevate the voice and needs of Olympians and Paralympians. The report calls for a rewrite of the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act, one of the several most important laws shaping our sports system. Originally drafted in 1978 at the height of the Cold War, the Sports Act created a dual mandate for what is now called the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee to A, support and send our national teams to international competition, and B, coordinate the development of sports in this country through certification and oversight of the 60-plus NGBs, or national governing bodies of sports focused on the grassroots. That's the so-called Olympic movement, the 11 million members of NGBs who participate in sports under the USOPC umbrella. Today, we're going to dig into the weeds and wisdom of the Ted Stevens Olympic and Amateur Sports Act, whose very name suggests the need for an update. Senator Stevens died long ago, and amateurism, at least as a legal defense, is on its final breaths. How to rebuild the thing at a time when every other institution in American sports, from college sports to youth sports, women's sports to high school sports, is in a state of massive disruption. In transformative moments like this, I find it helpful to start with the end in mind, a vision of what we want sports to be in this country, and in this case, what we want the Olympic movement to be. 4 years from now, the world will descend on Los Angeles for the Olympics and Paralympics. What's the story we can tell the world and tell ourselves by then? Will we have addressed fundamental flaws in the sports system that the USOPC and NGBs are tasked by Congress to develop? I'm not worried about high performance. We're going to top the medal count just as we've done at every Summer Olympics since the full dissolution of the Eastern Bloc. Add flag football and lacrosse, and NBC Sports will have more American storylines than it possibly can handle. But what about the rest of the story? The real story, the iceberg that sits underneath the podium, the sport delivery system in communities across the nation. Youth sport participation rates have fallen from 58% before the pandemic to just over 50%. Can we reverse that by 2028? Can we create more affordable sport programs? Can we help kids sample more sports on the Olympic agenda? Can we introduce standards that improve the quality of coaches who guide youth? By 2028, imagine a sport culture in which parents and young athletes can make informed decisions. They know which programs in their community conduct criminal background checks on coaches, what those coaches are trained in, from injury prevention to CPR to sports skills and tactics. Which programs adhere to the best practices of the American development model, which recognizes the value of age-appropriate play and training. Imagine a culture in which abuse, sexual, physical, and emotional, is just not tolerated, in which early specialization in sports is discouraged, in which the mental and physical health of young people is prioritized because we see the big picture. Today, athletes we see make it to the podium are more like survivors of a system that is dysfunctional at best and broken at worst. They are often the eggs we threw against the wall that didn't shatter. If I've learned anything in studying our sports system over the past 2 decades, it's that culture flows from structure, and structure flows from policy. We know that from Title IX in a positive way. Can we build a better Olympic movement by 2028? And if so, what will that take? To help me explore this terrain is our panel. Pat Kelleher, who is Executive Director of USA Hockey and the Chair of the NGB Council, which represents more than 60 NGBs. Jerice Colon, CEO of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. Ashley Huffman, former sport diplomacy chief at the U.S. Department of State. And Benita Fitzgerald Mosley, gold medal hurdler in the 1984 Olympics and board member of the Play Sports Coalition. Benita also was a member of the Olympic Reform Commission that just issued its report. We invite you to share your questions in the Q&A function. We'll leave room at the end of the session to ask a few. Please also share your thoughts on social. John Solomon on our team will be posting on X at Aspen Inst Sports. Benita, let's start with you. What's possible by 2028?
Not to use a pun, but I will. I hope that we're able to remove the hurdles out of the way for young people to be able to achieve their highest dreams possible in sport. Whether it's, from just the bare benefits that young people really achieve through their participation in sport, all the way and up to and including, of course, getting to the Olympic Games or professional sport or whatever. I often think about my daughter. When she was 8 years old, she came to me one day and she says, "Mommy, I can't wait till I win my gold medal." And those dreams that young people have, they're not thinking about the barriers. They're not thinking about anything else. They're just, dreaming. And what advantage she had was she has a family that's able to nurture those dreams, able to introduce her to a variety of sports as a youngster, from tennis and golf to volleyball and basketball to ultimately track and field and my sport. And thankfully, she ended up playing volleyball throughout middle school and high school, and also running track. And now she's a D1 athlete at University of Maryland running track. And so we were able to nurture that all the way along. But as CEO of Laureate Sport for Good, working on the Play Sports Coalition and other places, I know that there's so many barriers, so many hurdles in young people's way, particularly those in underserved communities. And we have to remove those barriers so that everyone has the opportunity to fully achieve their dreams.
Yeah. Pat, what's your vision?
Thanks, Tom. I would echo a lot of what Benita had to share there. I think the biggest thing is, how do we make every youth sports experience in every community as good as it possibly can be? That means to make it safe. That means to make it so the kids and the families get something out of it. Certainly in my role at USA Hockey, that's what we strive for every community where youth hockey is offered, to make sure it's the best youth sports experience that it can be. I feel that a lot of my fellow NGBs feel the same way. How do they do that at the grassroots level? Because, I get it, Tom, where you said we didn't really want to worry about the medal count or the top of the table in LA, but that's also a factor. And that's also something that NGBs do. Introduce kids and families to sport throughout the country, and then hopefully provide opportunities for them to achieve at the highest level in the Olympics or Paralympics.
Mm-hmm. Jerice, your vision?
I mean, I certainly agree with Benita and Pat, right? I mean, we want to make sure that, and as we look to 2028, we want kids to have access. We want to be able to build the pipeline, but in a safe way, right? And at the Center for Safe Sport, our goal, I think, is aligned with what we want today is what we want tomorrow. And that is that every athlete is able to participate in the sports they love in a safe manner, in a manner that they're supported and strengthened. And ultimately, come out of it with a good quality experience that helps build character and helps prepare them for their lives. And, I think as we think about 2028 and the future of sport, we need all of those things to exist, or we won't have one.
Gotcha. And Ashley, I call you Ash, your friend. You ran sport diplomacy at the State Department. What kind of questions do you think the world will be asking about the U.S. sports system as they come to the U.S. in 2028, and really before that at the 2026 World Cup? What should we be able to say to the world at that point?
Well, I think from a global perspective, we did a lot of finger wagging over the last 10 years around human rights abuses and kind of the rise in authoritarian regimes hosting mega events. And now the pendulum has swung. We're going to welcome the world 10 times in the next 10 years for big events in the US. And I think we have an opportunity to do something special. We have an opportunity to tell the American story, right? That we have a historic low participation rate among youth at 51%. And we're going to do what we always do as America. We're going to rise. We're going to restructure. We're going to create new policy. We're going to make it affordable. We're going to transform cultures and communities. And we're going to do that and meet those objectives just like we always have for ourselves. And I think the story we're going to tell is one of a united set of states, united by movement, where sport was a great lever for social change, and that we can tell the story of a decade of progress where we witnessed and survived a pandemic, the heartbreak of George Floyd, the election violence, and we moved towards something that looks safer, more inclusive, and more equitable, and that people who come here can see the freedom and diversity of all of these host cities and the American people, and just see the way that sport unites us.
Yeah. Now, the question is, how do we get there, right? So I want to bucket this conversation into three policy areas. Number one, keep kids safe. Number two, make sport accessible. And number three, govern sport better. So the first one, keep kids safe. Jerice, the center was set up in 2017 to root out and prevent abuse in sports. In the Senate and House hearings last week on the commission report, you testified that the center had already received 25,000 reports of abuse, and that number is growing. What does that tell you about the challenge we face in terms of prevention, and what do we need to do to bring that number down?
It tells me that we're still rooting it out. It tells me that people are still finding ways and strength to be able to report. And it tells me that we have a lot left to do, right? When you think about 25,000 report, that number, if you had asked me that like 5 years ago when I started at the center, would have been unfathomable. We did not think that we were going to be facing that. We certainly didn't think that the numbers would rise as quickly as they have. But what we've seen is that people are empowered, people are knowledgeable, people have trust. And they're coming forward with their stories, whether it's about sexual, physical, or emotional abuse and misconduct, and expecting and demanding answers, right, and resolutions. And so I think as we look towards the future, I think we know that those numbers are going to continue to rise because we're having conversations like this. And the more we do that, I think more people will find their voice, share their stories. And unfortunately, I don't see those numbers declining anytime soon. So as a nation, we really have got to get our hands around what culture change looks like so that we are on the prevention end of this instead of the reactionary and reporting side.
How do we address the center is primarily, not exclusively, but primarily focused on sexual abuse. How do we address physical and emotional abuse, which are often less serious, but far more common than sexual abuse? All you have to do is go out to your local field on a Saturday and see some of the parents and coaches going crazy.
Oh, I've seen it myself. I'm sure Pat has seen it too. And for us, we often see them together, right? So people will report a case of sexual abuse and also emotional abuse misconduct because one can anyway breed the other. And so, but often they don't, right? And I think that there is an ability and a need for organizations to have the capacity to handle some of those lower level abuse allegations in the moment. But in order to be able to do that, we have to prepare them to do that. And I think first, helping, particularly on the Olympic and Paralympic side, helping local affiliated organizations and local clubs, one, understand what abuse looks like and how it manifests, but then also giving them the tools and resources to be able to manage that effectively on the spot. Because sometimes it's just a conversation, right? It doesn't need a full-blown safe sport investigation to get kids back on the right track or to get parents back in line. But I think it is certainly a collective effort. And at the center, we send back a lot of cases back to NGBs and to their LAOs to handle themselves. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see more of that just because, people are just a little mean right now.
What kind of budget? What kind of budget do you need? Do we need to do this? And who pays for it? I mean, the commission suggested that the federal government, rather than the USOPC and NGBs, which are now giving $20 million to the center, that the government cover the costs.
Yeah, so for us, our budget sits around $23 million right now, and we're facing a $1.5 million deficit next year, and we know this already, and that is at the rates that we are already at. And what I shared with Congress last week is that the center really needs around $30 million to operate effectively at the rate we think we're going to be headed, particularly towards 2028. And I think, right now we've got a mix of funding from, the majority of it coming from the Olympic and Paralympic movement, and a small piece coming from through a federal grant. We have been lobbying to get that grant increase for years because we need it. And so, I don't think that the answer is all or nothing. I think it is a combination of funding streams for the center and for this work, because I think one of the things that was missed last week and often is missed when you're thinking about safe sport is that, yes, there's, $20+ million invested in the Center for Safe Sport, but NGBs across the board also invest. So the number of dollars and time and staff that's really dedicated to athlete safety is a lot higher, right, than one would think.
Yeah. Benita, how do you, I mean, the commission had some ideas around this. How do you suggest that cases down in the grassroots at the youth level get processed?
It's difficult. And the main, I think I go back to some of the other recommendations about some of the reporting and the oversight, because the challenge that we're facing is that even though we say there's 11 million members of the, however many, few dozen national governing bodies, there are far more young people participating in sport outside of the auspices of the NGB, USOPC, or the Olympic movement. And so it's getting our handle on and our arms around where and who where they're competing, which organizations are competing, making sure that they're all part of the same ecosystem, having some ability to have oversight of those organizations, and then impose the same I wouldn't say restrictions, but things that we have to do in order to ensure the safe sport guidelines are implemented at those organizations as well.
Yep. Ash, you led the research on our comparative analysis at Aspen on the world's leading sports systems. We published that last fall. What did you learn about how other countries approach safe sport issues and how well they approach it?
Well, you know what? I mean, I just think it's just a little bit different than like a USADA issue where it's like, did you drink a Celsius or did you not? It's less black and white, right? Like it's more nuanced and behind closed doors. And so you see sort of everyone scrambling, to be honest, looking across the best sports systems in the world. I'm not sure really anyone's nailing it. There are a lot of people that are responding to headlines, and it's very scandal driven and reactive instead of proactive. So, the United States is not the only one with a Larry Nassar type incident. Canada, France, Australia, many countries are undergoing the same kinds of shock and horror, what's been covered up for so long. So many of the top 12 sports systems have established similar entities to the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. For example, England, Germany, and Australia, they have sport integrity units that do similar things to our safe sport unit. In Sweden, they have a sport ombudsman and an anonymous whistleblower site. In New Zealand, they have like a complaints and mediation service. Some of these are government funded. Some of these are private, like third-party entities. Some have tried to incorporate laws like duty of care laws. Sport England, for example, if you can't do it in a classroom as a teacher, then you can't do it on the field as a coach. So if you wouldn't throw a chair in a classroom, don't do that on field. If you wouldn't berate a student, grab them, pick them up by their jersey, then to a student, then you wouldn't do that, in the classroom or on the court. So some are relying, I think, solely on the police, like France, to report, and minors, when we're talking about minors, when we're talking about abuse, when we're talking about the ways it's been normalized, when we're talking about power imbalances, relying solely on the police is a really tough situation, I think, because most of those things are going to go unreported. And of the top 12, Spain, Japan, China, and France have no clear way to report still yet after all of the headline issues.
Pat, sport providers that are members of an NGB must abide by the rules of Say Sport, right? Adults caring for kids must pass criminal background checks and go through the abuse prevention training. But the Sports Act does not require any organization to be a member of that sport federation or governing body, as is the case in many other countries. At the summit, the Project Play Summit last year in Colorado Springs, USOPC Chief of Sport Rocky Harris called that a fundamental flaw in our system, and that needs to be fixed. Your thoughts?
Yeah, we would agree with that. I mean, I think when there are entities that push to go outside of the NGBs, oftentimes they do to say it makes it easier or it's cheaper or it's, whatever they use in some of those regards. And sometimes it's making sport less safe. We hear that. And I know, my colleague at USA Softball, Craig Kress, has shared with us, and at the hearing that he was at last week of, the other entities that are out in the softball world that promote the fact that their programs don't have to follow the same guidelines as the center. And that's not making sports safer. And we've certainly had these conversations. Jerice is well aware, and it's how do we balance that, right? How do we make sure everybody follows the same rules to make all of sports safe? And at the same time, how do we do that so we can manage, the caseloads that Jerice and her team already have at the Center for Safe Sport? And I think that does go back to some of those who are capable, some of our larger NGBs to handle some of these, some of these cases that do happen at the grassroots level. So even to Jerice's point that not everything is a federal case, there are things that could be handled at the grassroots or local level, and it's making sure there's a structure and system in place to do that within the NGB worlds. But I think it is, we did a survey 2 years ago of parents of kids in USA Hockey that are ages between 9 and 12, and it was about an 85% approval or appreciation rate for the fact of all the things that we do to make hockey safer within USA Hockey, including our work with the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, background checks, and all of that stuff. So I think parents do pay attention, but there's enough parents and enough programs out there that go outside of the NGBs for purposes that don't help make our sports safer, that we need to find a way to bring underneath the tent, so to speak.
Yep. Benita, what do you think the American public wants when it comes to health and safety in youth sports? I mean, do you think they want, a free-for-all in which anyone can coach kids, no questions asked, and there are no asks made around, minimum safety conditions like injury prevention, abuse prevention? I mean, that's what Senator Ted Cruz suggested last week in reacting to the commission's report. He called it a federal takeover of Little League, of course, forgetting that Little League was established with a federal charter, and Little League teams often play on fields built with matching grants from the federal government. What do you think?
Yeah,
I mean, what does the public want?
The challenge I find, and I think the commission found in some of the research, which, was the largest study of its kind ever done on the Olympic movement. And we got feedback from all aspects, from parents and young people and athletes and others. But I think even in my personal experience is that parents don't know. They don't know what they don't know. There's a high level of ignorance around which organizations to have their kids, do their sport with, how to find a club or an organization or a coach, what requirements or expectations they should have. They feel beholden to that coach and the power that coach has over their child's playing time, over their ability to matriculate from one level to the next level to the next level. And so I think it's incumbent upon the Olympic movement, Safe Sport, the NGBs, et cetera, we need to publicize better those expectations that parents should have for the organizations and the sports that these kids participate in. I don't know well, I know for sure your first statement, do we want the Wild Wild West? No, nobody wants that. But that's the system that we have in many cases. And unless and until we're able to put those kind of guardrails in place, publicize them, make sure parents understand what resources they have to be able to better ascertain the best fit and the safest environment for their children. At this point, they're just really, really ignorant. They just don't know. And there's not any one-stop shop, no one place for them to go, or no entity providing that kind of oversight and instruction and direction for them to be able to find those answers and get those guidelines. It's really tough.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the second bucket, the second policy bucket, which is make sport accessible. Going back to you, Benita, what did the commission have to say on this topic?
What we found in many cases is that we didn't get as much data as we might have liked from the Olympic movement around participation rates, around the diversity and background of those participants, around, economic levels of those participants, which kids came from underserved communities, which were Black and brown, which are female and male. And so it was hard in many cases. We had to go outside of the Olympic movement to get those answers and to get some of that data. And so back to I know you're going to get to the recommendation around the Inspector General and around HHS and the entity, et cetera. But part of that, the reasoning behind that was to ensure we do have the best data with which to make the best decisions and recommendations moving forward.
And you proposed a grant program,
Yes.
right? How would that grant program work?
Yeah, so you mentioned that I'm co-founder and still on the board of the Play Sports Coalition, and that coalition has been very successful, along with organizations like Laureate Sport for Good in Chicago and other places, in uncovering and finding federal and state money in order to support youth sports in those areas, and then provide grants to local organizations who are doing the right thing, who have safe sport restrictions and protections in place, who are doing coach training, who are developing athletes in the appropriate way, and increasing accessibility by supporting and providing sports opportunities for kids who otherwise wouldn't have those opportunities. And so we've seen it work, albeit in a smaller way. Some of those grants funds are tied to mobile sports betting. Others come straight out of the state budget, and they understand that providing more of the opportunities benefit those young people, benefit the communities from which they come, benefit the families. And so there's a proven model out there already, and so we wouldn't have to make it up. And so similarly with HHS and or a grant program that would be federally administered, we would want to include those kinds of safeguards, those kinds of recommendations and requirements in place around coach training, around the athlete development model, around sports sampling, around ensuring that kids have the appropriate skills developed at a young age to be able to do sport at all, and of course safe sport. And so I think the models here, we understand what that looks like, and I think taking it to the next level by having that kind of grant for, I think, for-profit and nonprofit organizations alike, and then incentivizing both a carrot and stick approach, having the Inspector General's office be able to provide that oversight, but have a carrot approach for incentivizing people for doing the right thing, and then monitoring that progress with milestones along the way.
Yep. What about NGBs? I mean, Pat, set aside for a moment the entity, we'll get to this, the entity that would distribute such funds. How would you like to see the NGBs show up in such an arrangement?
I think, again, it would go back to defining, as I think Benita tried to do, they're defining what the grants are for, right? And how can they be accessed? Meaning, again, I mean, we receive funding at the NGB level from the USOPC around high performance, right? That's some of the funding we receive, which is necessary to try and develop players for the Olympic and Paralympics. At the grassroots level, what are the markers we're putting in there? And again, I think Benita noted a bunch of them there. Are they following ADM principles? Do they have coach education? Is everybody background screen? Is there safe sport training? I think all of those things, the majority of us NGBs would sign up for that in a big way, because that's what the NGBs do. But we also have 50 plus NGBs. They are different shapes and sizes, and some don't have grassroots pipelines, right? Some sports that are later development have largely just elite level athletes or national or Paralympic level national athletes. That is a little bit different, but I do think, Tom, there's enough consistencies there, especially if we're talking about grassroots and talking about participation numbers. There's plenty of things that can be measured there. And I think a lot of the NGBs would definitely be on board and excited about, because that's what a lot of us do on a daily basis, is grow the game, grow our respective games.
I just wanted to add too, around the accessibility issue, that Paralympic sports haven't received the same amount of attention, funding. There's so few opportunities, particularly at the grassroots level, where the athlete development part happens. I think I agree with Pat from the standpoint of, even with the Paralympic sports, we're doing well now at the elite level, at Team USA level, at the Olympic and Paralympic level. We have elite athletes, but particularly on the Paralympic side, that athlete development, the youth development through sport, is not happening at the Paralympic level. And I think the grant program could be especially helpful there.
Yeah, especially if it's set up as like an incentive. I mean, this is what when I testified at the commission's loan public hearing last September, this is what I try to, the idea I tried to pump in the bloodstream, these grassroots performance plans, right? Where, great, you got the high performance plan, $110 million or so a year is distributed by the USOPC based upon whether you can get an athlete on the podium. But like, what if every NGB created a grassroots performance plan, or a GPP, that you've got, how well are you doing in growing participation, coaching, diversity in your pipeline, abuse prevention, all of it. And then make it competitive and distribute the money to those who are doing the very best job, right? Just change the incentive structure.
I think,
Ash.
Tom, sorry, real quick.
I think
that there's a lot of the NGBs. That's what everyone does on a regular basis, right? Grow the game, good coaching. I mean, the pipeline to the top to win Olympic and Paralympic gold medals starts at that grassroots level and all the way up a pipeline for a lot of sports. So I think a lot of the things you're saying are in play, and probably just codifying them as you've mentioned.
Well, putting money behind it too, because right now, if you're going to support that stuff, you got to go get it from foundations or corporations. The pot of money is we don't have that pot of money. My sense is from NGBs that a lot of them really want to do this, but they just don't. They don't have the resources to do it. I mean, Ash, how are incentives used in other countries to create sport models and systems that are believed to be productive?
Yeah, before I answer that, just to piggyback on Benita's comment, obviously we have a great deficiency around adaptive sport at the youth level. I really appreciate you pointing that out. And, one thing that we've seen work in the U.S. government, which I know we're going to talk about governance structures, but in the sports diplomacy office, when we were a grants pass-through office for, $7 million worth of foreign policy sport development, a third of that was focused on Title IX, and a third of it was focused on Americans with Disabilities Act. And those two policies really allowed and drove, such great global participation for girls and women and persons with disabilities. So if there was something similar on the domestic side, I do think it could be really valuable in terms of that. So what did we see in other countries? Lots of things. There were a lot of innovative ideas in terms of, from doctors writing prescriptions, pediatricians, kids coming in and pediatricians being able to assess health needs, whether it be mental, social isolation, or physical, and being able to write a prescription for sport so that the costs are covered. We saw voucher programs for Title I schools where parents would have $50 per kid, per sport, per season to cover registration costs and uniforms, or to help cover. We saw coaching incentives and grants and support communities around coaching. We saw tax deductions on equipment. Why do we ask coaches and teachers, some of the lowest paid individuals in the world, to pay for their own school supplies and to bring their own cones? Like, it's wild. We saw, a lot of public-private funding partnership models. We saw You know, laws that were in place where boards and coaching staffs had to reflect the communities that in which they serve. And then, of course, through grants and the power of the permit, like the Land and Water Conservation Fund. If we use that as more, right now it's just transactional. You apply for the permit, you get the permit, you use the recreational field. But if there was some accountability behind that, or some safeguarding measures, or some inclusion measures, then I think that permit becomes really valuable. So those are some of the incentives that we saw in other places.
And where does the money come from in these other? Is it what national lotteries? Is it sports betting? Is it the direct government appropriations? What?
All of the above. So we saw both public and private funding. We saw, directly from taxpayers. We saw a lot of, like, Norway has a $400 million per year sports lottery that then funds youth sports. That's a lot of money. Sports betting, other vice taxes, which is what they call it. And right now we don't have that sports betting money going anywhere really. So, that's a kind of a newbie that maybe we could utilize. And then, I don't know, like, our country is unique in that we have some of the greatest domestic professional sports leagues in the world. Could there also be some contribution from the leagues as they grow participation, grow the game, and grow their fan base? So
What about, the commission pumped a few ideas into the bloodstream, Benita. I know around like a federal excise tax on sports betting, an IRS checkbox, a couple of, and there was a little bit of language around like mega events, or at least the 28 Olympics. And we know that the 84 Olympics created the LA 84 Foundation, which has become a grant maker, regional grant maker since then. The 94 World Cup created the U.S. Soccer Foundation, which is building many pitches all over the country. The 2022 Salt Lake City Olympics created a legacy fund that's done a lot of amazing things in that state. If there's a surplus from the 2028 Olympics, should they go to youth sports?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I think for each of the mega events, as you said, there's 10 in the next decade. And I think there should be a requirement that that's part of the budget. It's not only if we have extra that, the IOC prepaid, if you will, to LA for taking the latter games and letting Paris kind of go first in 2024. 16 million, or no, it's more than that. I don't remember how much it was. It was quite a bit of money. I can't remember how much it was. But they prepaid the kind of a legacy fund so that they could, start giving out grants to families and doing other things well ahead of time. What I'm saying is, I think for each of these events, they're going out raising money, and I know they're expensive to put on, and they get more expensive every time. But LA, in particular, has touted the fact that they don't have to build a lot of the infrastructure that a lot of other places have. Most of the stadiums are already in place. And so their budget in particular should be used. I think adding it, and it'll probably be controversial, but to the same pot of money that's already there. I mean, no sense creating a separate entity, but in giving those grant funds out, ensuring, just like we did about the government grants, the same requirements that they adhere to around safe sport, coaching, athlete development, etc. So I think also, as we think about funding mechanisms, even if all 10 entities did that, they're probably going to keep those funds in a very localized way. And so that's not really going to help the entire ecosystem across the country have the resources they need in order to do that. And so hence the commission talking about a federal tax on mobile sports betting, having other ways, the checkbox on the federal tax returns and other things, because we need more ongoing, consistent funding mechanisms in order to fund grassroots sport in America. That's the way it is. And then you've got, and we haven't gotten to that yet, but the whole pay to play ecosystem, I think, I won't say a tax, but an opportunity for those entities as well to, offer money into a pot. And I think many of those parents, myself included, would be happy to, check a box to donate money to funding for other, young people to have similar experiences as my child and my
Yeah.
children, my son and daughter were able to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's I'm going to whip through a couple charts because I want to save enough time for our final bucket here. But maybe Sabrina, you can pull up the next chart. NGB. We surveyed the NGBs last year and asked them, what do you need to be more effective in the grassroots? And 6 out of 10 said we need more public policy that is supportive of sport development in general. They also said they need more educational resources, but 100% of them said they need more financial resources. It speaks to the crunch that a lot of these NGBs, which have that national footprint, are under right now. And then when we asked them, go to the next slide, where that money should come from, it's interesting. There is philanthropy, business, and there's also great receptivity to government money, which government comes with strings. But the NGB certainly seem ready for it. They're 60%, 58% also say the USOPC should do something in this area. All right, so let's go to the third bucket here, which is govern sport better. Ash, as quickly as you possibly can here, I guess, walk us through how sport is governed in the U.S. as set up by the Sports Act and other key sport policies, really just kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah, in a nutshell, we're completely different than everyone else in the sense that we don't have a Ministry of Sport and we don't have an arm's length body that's sort of a quasi-government, nimble agency to execute on mass sport participation. So we are structured by the 1978 Ted Stevens Act, which was basically an unfunded mandate that gave the USOPC and ultimately the NGBs, the power and responsibility of trying to grow grassroots sports in the United States. And unfortunately, because they're so under-resourced and understaffed, and not incentivized really to do so in the ways that they are around podium success, we've been left with really a highly privatized pay-for-play food truck model where people are popping up left and right and opening football clubs and AAU teams, and no one's asking for their qualifications because they are promising scholarships, and that's all that really matters. So that's how we're structured now.
Gotcha. Now, what about a couple other countries? Let's talk about. You mentioned Norway, but what about Australia and England? Who drives mass sport participation in those countries?
Yeah, all of those countries have a pretty clear reporting line in the sense that the Ministry of Sport handles the policy. They distribute the money over to a Sport England or Sport Australia, which then distributes to the masses. And they work at the federal level, the regional levels, and then the provincial or city-state level. And so right now, a Sport England, a Sport Australia, they would be responsible for a 4, 5, or 10-year strategic plan that guides youth sport, as opposed to our very reactionary model that says, oh, there's a crisis and we need to address it. Let's go to Congress. So that's the difference in the flow.
Gotcha. And Benita, the commission proposed taking the grassroots away from the USOPC and giving it to a new federal office within HHS. Why is that the right venue?
Again, I think it's a combination of the three things. I think it's a combination of having the proper oversight, which the USOPC has shown in many occasions that they are not providing the proper oversight. I think they're capable. It just hasn't happened. And of course, having a funding mechanism at the federal level, whether it's for additional funding for Safe Sport to make it independent, additional funding for the Team USA Athletes Commission to make it independent, right? As well as for grassroots sports and setting the requirements and expectations. And then, what are the funding mechanisms? So it was a 3-part thing, and the recommendations may have happened in 3 different places, but I think all of it come together is really the answer and the response and the commission's recommendation overall. And so why is it better? Having worked at the USOPC and having worked at an NGB, I see the the challenges with having this dual mandate. And with the most pressing, most urgent need to produce an Olympic team that is competitive and hopefully, wins the medal count. And I know Pat is, he's with USA Hockey is one of the NGBs that seems to have figured it out, how to manage and produce high performing national teams, Team USA, Olympic teams, as well as take care of and have a great system for developing athletes and keeping them safe. More NGBs need to do that. And the USOPC, I believe, because their primary attention has been on the Olympic team and Paralympic team, they haven't, they've just shirked their responsibility in that area. And it's probably not for lack of wanting to do it. It's just not having the bandwidth to be able to do it all. So having had 40 some years where they've had this mandate and it hasn't happened, the commission said, okay, let's call a spade a spade. Let's just go and figure out a different model for able to manage it, because that's what they want. And clearly, we could go another 40 some years. I don't think anything would change otherwise.
Yeah. Pat, and Ash, any concerns with that model, meaning placing it in effect, having the NGBs and others, basically having youth sports and youth and grassroots sports run out of a, government agency?
Yeah, I think there could be unintended consequences, right? And I think, again, we have many different NGBs, different shapes and sizes, but our responsibilities are similar. It's the challenge of being a full service NGB. And to Benita's point, we've done it effectively in USA Hockey. To Tom, as you know, our try, we do as grassroots as try hockey for free programs to get kids out on the ice to try our sport before they register or play it. But if we decoupled all of that grassroots from our elite stuff, I don't know how that would work. It's been kind of thrown around before, but I think for us it does come through. And I have a lot of NGBs that have had success. Again, maybe bigger ones, but other ones in both summer and winter sports have that grassroots component. So USA Wrestling, for example, they have that grassroots component all the way up. Work with the NCAA college athletics, and then put athletes on the podium. And so it'd be hard, I think, to say that one, you do one without the other. I do think the best programs are doing both, the grassroots all the way up. Because again, you don't win medal counts without these athletes. Don't just show up at the Olympics or Paralympics, right? And I think that, as Ashley's point earlier, and Benita, there's been much more emphasis on the Paralympics as well. And so I think that's where I worry about unintended consequences, Tom, of decoupling or changing or giving someone else. I mean, are there things we can be better on? Absolutely. And I think that's really where we look at it. And I know that's where the OPC looks at it as well.
Can I just say,
yeah, go ahead.
I think in our minds, I don't know that we would want to decouple. I think much like the USOPC sits alongside the NGBs in kind of aiding and abetting and supporting and advising, that this new entity would want to do the same. I think that taking and extricating all of that from the national governing bodies is probably wrong and just a huge behemoth. That who are these people in the federal government? How are they equipped to be able to do that? So I think this oversight is really important. I think having supplemental funding and setting expectations and some requirements around that, incentivizing certain behaviors within and among the NGBs, and providing, like I said, that supplemental funding, I think is the way to go. And but it has to happen in partnership, I believe, with the whole Olympic and Paralympic movement, not as a separate entity that just goes off and does it all by itself. I don't think the ecosystem can work if it's completely separate.
Mm-hmm. It seemed the alternative models to having it run through the federal government would be like we're creating a quasi-government body like a Sport England called Sport America or whatever else maybe that's focused on the grassroots. Number one. Maybe number two would be expanding the mission of USADA, the anti-doping agency, which does some stuff in youth sports, but is primarily about doping. And Travis is, very much Travis Tiger is very much a trusted leader. Or expanding, I don't know if you're up, if you want that, Jerice, but expanding the mission of the Center for Safe Sport, where it becomes something like the Center for Safe and Healthy Sport, and it's not just about abuse, but it's about best practices in general. Or maybe there's the National Fitness Foundation. Maybe some existing quasi-government entity that you sort of reshape a little bit. I mean, Jerice, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm going to pass on that for the Center. I think we have our hands full. And I think a lot of the organizations have their hands full, right? And we all do. Some of the things we do are redundant. Others are very unique. And I think bringing in another organization to have oversight over that is interesting. But I think, as Pat said, I think there'll be some unintended consequences. Frankly, I think the structure that we have right now, if it was better nurtured, if it was better funded, it would work. And when we think about the grassroots sports leading, just filling up the pipeline and having athletes going to the Olympic and Paralympic Games, that has worked in some pieces. And I know that there's certainly a lot of work to be done on whether it's the USOPC, the NGB, Center for Safe Sport, or even USADA. I think where we have come from in the last 40 years has been significant, and there has been a lot of work that has been done. So I wouldn't say that it's been stagnant as we're thinking about just the ability for growth and the need or lack thereof of oversight at all. But I think that each of these could take on a little bit more, but to everyone's point, I think everyone's mentioned it today, is that funding would certainly be necessary. And the dollars just have not matched up with the need up to this point.
Yeah.
Funding has to go along with better oversight. And so that's where I feel like the rub is at this point, because you can't just throw money at it and in the same issues and the same challenges that we're having will still exist. We'll just have more money, to do some of the things. It'll get better, but I think we'll still have some of the same challenges if we don't have.
I get that, but I also think that we have to make some agreements on what accountability looks like and what oversight.
I agree.
Right? Because if it is, checking a box like that every organization is audited, okay, that's easy enough, and that would be considered oversight. Or if it's, setting some real standards across the entire sport movement, and I'm not talking just about Olympic and Paralympic movement, but grassroots as well. Absolutely. That's a different level of oversight that I think that, a lot of sport organizations would welcome, because then it proves to people why their programs are going to be better. Right. And I think
I 100% agree with you.
NGBs are struggling with now is like trying to convince people that the pop-up program on the corner is going to give you the same level of support and trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I can just say, having worked in the government, if there's no office, there's no voice. If there's no voice, there's no money. There's no, it's going to be you can't afford sport. That's a you problem. You aren't protected within sport. That sounds like a you problem. It's never going to be an us problem unless I spent so much of my time evangelizing people on sport in a world that just didn't understand it. I'm surrounded by government officials and they're like, not important. It's military. It's intelligence, it's cybersecurity. And I'm like, but it's also the health crisis that we're facing as America and the ways that kids don't want to live anymore. So, it's not
that our military can't field a healthy group of people because 80% of them don't qualify for the physical standards. I mean, it does impact all those things.
Yeah. So I want to leave, there's not a whole lot of time for it. I'm so sorry, but I want to leave a little bit of room for a couple questions. So Marty, one or two we can run through from the audience.
Sure. Thanks for the great conversation. The first question actually ties back to our conversation last month on college sports reform, and I'm going to send it to Pat. Many elite athletes are trained by NCAA member universities, not NGBs directly. And some of the proposed reforms to the NCAA could lead to some significant cuts in university funding of Olympic sports. So how are NGBs preparing to support those NCAA sports programs? Do you have the capacity right now?
I would say largely no, we don't have the capacity. That we rely on the NCAA to help develop Olympians and Paralympians, and I think that's significant. I know the USOPC is certainly continuing to be in heavy conversations with the NCAA about those things, the impact that changes to NCAA sports would have on the Olympic sports, the Paralympic sports. Again, for the hockey side, I mean, we have 65 Division I programs on the men's side, and I think 45 on the women's side, and that's where our best athletes. That's where the majority of our athletes aspire to go play first, and then the next step is professional or international teams. So that helps the whole of our sport. And I think that's the same for a lot of sports. So those are challenges we're certainly monitoring and watching at all levels of Olympic sport.
Thanks. And Jerice, many athletes have openly criticized Safe Sport for their perception of how Safe Sport handles investigations. I mean, I heard it again last week in the hearings on the Hill. How is Safe Sport planning to be more transparent in its systems and processes? And how can you better involve athletes and coaches in the development of those processes?
Yeah, we've certainly heard the criticism over the years, and certainly more recently. And so one of the things that we are already doing is undergoing a complete top to bottom review of our entire investigative process. And we, in doing that, we solicited feedback and input from NGBs and athletes, so that the decisions we're making, we're not just making them internally, because we understand that they impact upwards of 11 million people. And so we'll continue to do that. In fact, on April 1st, we'll be rolling out a number of changes, and you'll start to see more of those, particularly for those people who already have cases with the Center for Safe Sport or who will be reporting.
Thanks. And I think time for the last question. In our current system, memberships like metric growth tend to emphasize the expansion of travel sports. So for NGBs, what alternative metrics do you recommend for assessing the growth and health of the sport at a grassroots level? Tom, I think that gets back to your grassroots performance plan idea. How can NGBs better support and measure the impact of grassroots initiatives?
Well, I think it's making sure we're measuring, or what are we measuring? Again, within USA Hockey, we have 400,000 members that are under the age of 18 participating in hockey programs around the country. And depending on what you call elite or where you start elite, we have a rule in place that 15% or less are at our quote unquote tier 1 level. And again, that's now age 13 to 18 is tier 1 level. So if you look at that, by volume, the vast majority of our participants in USA Hockey through the NGB are recreational level. They may aspire to something higher. So I think it's some of that is getting better, probably definitions on what people mean by that. There's a lot of programs that are recreational in nature. But it's how do we define elite versus recreational? What ages do we do that? I think, Tom, from the ADM, I mean, plenty of parents want to define their child as elite, the best 8-year-old hockey player in the country. Well, that's a long way from the NHL at 8 years old to be, or a long way from any national team from that level. So I think those are some of the things we got to look at too. What are we defining as elite or pay to play or recreational?
Well, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you, Jerice, Pat, Ashley, and Benita. It's really been a great conversation. It's a conversation that has a long tail. I mean, whether or not Congress does anything with this commission report this year, turning it into legislation, there are ideas in those 277 pages that are worth mulling. And hopefully we pumped a few more ideas into the bloodstream today. We're going to continue the dialogue at the Project Place Summit, May 14th and 15th in Baltimore, where we have a track dedicated to sport governance and policy. We're sold out already, but feel free to add your name to the wait list for consideration if and as more tickets come available. We're doing what we can to facilitate conversation on sports reform, because I agree with the commission in that we have a once in a generation, those are their words, opportunity to build a better system. With everything that's happening in college sports, women's sports, NIL, and more, we need more thought leadership that sees the big picture. So let's get it right, starting at the base, center the human and athletic development needs of our 60 million youth, and watch everything that sits on top of that foundation flourish. Healthier communities, better athletes, and more Olympic and Paralympic inspiration. I promise you, the best story in sports awaits, and with arts and courage, we can start telling it by 2028. Final housekeeping item, keep up with the latest from our sports and society program by registering for our newsletter. Visit as.pn/pp subscribe to sign up. As a subscriber, you'll learn about future resources and events, including the next Future of Sports conversation and our work with Project Play. Thank you for joining us today. Be well and see you next time.